charm.
I
We are,
love it.
yay.
Good morning, Cynthia. Good morning, LinkedIn.
Good
Cynthia
morning.
and I are very happy to be with you here on this crisp fall morning, a beautiful day in September, to talk about employee experience. We know that's a huge topic and it covers a lot of ground. So we've got some ideas that we want to share with you today about how do you connect the dots between talent and culture? And how do you use that all important life cycle of the employee to really take a look at employee experience? So welcome. If this is the first time you are joining us here, this is Thursdays with Culture Talk. And we're always tackling some aspect of culture, workplace culture, and the many different things that it touches. Culture Talk, if you're new to this conversation, is a platform that enables organizations to measure and define their workplace culture, to kind of give it handles, if you will, and create something tangible, something that then becomes a business asset. When you have something that's tangible, you can shape it, you can change it, you can transform it, and you can also use it as a tool to move different initiatives forward. A lot of times organizations find it hard to leverage their culture. And so we're constantly bringing ideas to you about ways that you can do that you can leverage culture to shift and change and drive, ROI from a tangible business asset. But if you can't define it, a lot of organizations can't, and they struggle to define it and to create that tangibility, and then they have a hard time using it as a lever. So Culture Talk really helps you to connect the dots, and this platform and the tools that we talk about help you to connect the dots between talent and culture. And that's really what we want to focus on today. Really thinking about the different ways you can do that. So that's one way. And
Yeah. And we have been all year following what we're calling the 6 critical paths. And it's just our way of helping people who are involved with any aspect of culture really think through how could they take this framework that we've built at Culture Talk, which is based in storytelling, and we're going to talk about those stories in a little bit more detail. But how can you use a framework of storytelling to make something in an organization connected to culture easier? So we have thus far talked about brand and culture shift and transformation, leadership, team building. How do you use story to make those kinds of initiatives easier? As Theresa mentioned, today we're jumping into employee experience. And just to define it, we are thinking about every touch point that somebody has with your organization, starting with the day they saw your job advertised, the impression, the feeling, the sense of connection that created, what brought them through the door through any kind of recruiting work that you're doing, their experience interviewing, onboarding, becoming part of a team, having the opportunity to learn and grow as part of your organization. So all of those different touch points, how can we use story and archetype story specifically to connect it, to make it feel very connected to the culture that you're looking to create? And how do you get people really engaged and supportive and sharing that story with the world around them? So that's the employee experience life cycle. And Theresa, do you think I could bring up real quickly just that image?
Yeah, bring up that graphic. We've been playing with something new to share this idea. I think it's pretty cool. I think it gets at the points, pretty well.
There you go.
Okay. So the employee experience critical path, like Cynthia said, it dives into some key areas. And a lot of times I think people get really all the way to number 4 and they start focusing there on how do we develop our talents, and we understand the need to develop our talents, and they miss some of these other ways to do things, or they consider these things in isolation. And so we're suggesting that the story, and there's really 2 sides to the story. right? The story we create using our culture can be used throughout all aspects of this employee experience. And I think that, from that perspective, we like to think about two sides of the culture equation. On one hand, we have the employees, critical to this critical path, right? And the other, we have what people consider and talk about as the organizational culture. And before we even dive into how to deal with employee experience, I think it's important to note that those two are intertwined and that the healthy development of one supports the success of the other. But good luck trying to do one if you haven't really put the time and energy and effort into understanding the other, because it's going to be like a weight that's dragging you down if you haven't addressed both sides of the culture equation. So really the ability to drive impact and results and, engage people around their purpose and their own sense of self, worth and their story. We need to have a culture that really supports that kind of work. So there's two sides, and it's important that you, in the ideas that we're going to share here around the employee life cycle, it is important that we recognize that we're looking at both sides of that equation.
Yeah.
So maybe even starting with the employment brand, right?
Right.
How does that use the culture component?
Yeah. So, in addition to being two sides, I just want to comment on story because we've mentioned it several times. And the CultureTalk work is built around the framework of storytelling, in specifically archetype stories. And archetypes it's just a fancy word that means story patterns. That means being able to align an organization's cultural behaviors with certain story patterns and our own motivation, strengths, shadow traits around other, the same 12 story patterns. So we use 12 story patterns in the work. And why, I just want to comment for a second on why story is so key, right? Because as human beings, we are storytellers. We are we lean in when we hear stories. We create meaningful connections when we hear stories. We have a way of remembering and making sense of things through stories. And so there's a lot of just innate power in using story as a mechanism and as a framework. So let's go right to the beginning, to the recruit piece of the employee experience. And Theresa, you alluded to employment brand, which we would consider to be part of an organization's storyline. Tell us how we can get there.
Right. Absolutely. So the development of an employment brand can be handled in a very distinct process, understanding the story of the organization. And that's through doing what we would call a baseline culture audit. So identifying what is the profile of this organization? What does it really feel like to come to work here? What does it feel like to be a part of this experience and to contribute to this group? It's going to be unique. It's going to have nuance that is unlike any other workplace. And so by being able to craft a story and using language and words that tap into this intangible of feeling, of what it feels like, of what we tolerate here. Oftentimes, organizations are really great at listing out the things that they expect. So we might have an employee handbook or values, those all important words like integrity that show up in so many values and mission statements, et cetera. But that doesn't answer the question about what's the brand? What's the employee experience when people show up to work? What happens when you're working on a late night deadline and you're up against the clock with a colleague? How does it feel to work together and to collaborate? Those intangibles. So we're going to do a culture audit that helps us to understand how to talk about those things, that gives a voice and a language to that experience and uses that as a way to develop the story. And when we've got a story that's based on human experience, it's a whole lot more tangible, meaningful, and memorable, sticky, if you will, and honest. And really, employees today are really critically concerned about authenticity and honesty. They don't want to be sold a bill of goods.
And I love to, in measuring the culture and letting the story emerge through that lens, because there are a lot of like branding techniques or employment branding where we're kind of jumping to, hey, we need an Instagram account. We're jumping to what's the message.
Tactics.
We're jumping, putting something
Yeah.
out without taking that time for the self-reflection that really enables us to go, this is us. And this is us in a way that nobody else could be, right? The way it feels here in this organization. So,
Yeah.
super important piece at the front of an employee experience is how they experience your brand. And other ways of thinking about story in that first quadrant, that recruit and hire quadrant, is we also have archetypes as individuals. We have our own storylines, and they're very nuanced and unique as well. They may feel like personal, handprints, if you will. And so we're going to bring on this live stream in 2 weeks, September 28th, some folks that have been using individual archetype assessments as part of their hiring process, not as a gatekeeper, but as a way of deepening the interview process and really helping the individual they're interviewing as well as the interviewee understand, how is this person going to add to the culture? How is this person going to add to the team? And what are the things that, perhaps are going to make one candidate stand out over another? So,
right. I like to think about that as, who's the human being sitting across the table from me or talking to me on, on the computer, but who is the human being, and how do I use their personal story to get to know them so much more effectively and so much faster?
Right. Right. Yeah. I think the speed piece is kind of key when you're interviewing. We do have a question coming in, Theresa, that says, how do you keep the branding fresh so it's not one and done?
Oh, wow. Well, one idea that we've seen be really powerful is to integrate the employee stories with the organizational story. So when you're telling the organizational story, you are attracting people who are intrigued by that, who feel connected to that. And when they come and join your team, then they've got a story and they've got an experience with your organization. And so many different ways that you can get the individuals to share their experiences. And there's just an endless stream of content that you can tap into that is tied to someone's authentic expression of how they're experiencing the brand. And then I think also in the hands of, some communications professionals, that there are many different ways, especially with all the mediums we have available to us today, to continue to refresh that message. One aspect I would add of doing a strong employment brand is to give yourself a real bucket of content to work with. In the work that we've done, we look at creating a culture code, for instance, that could be part of that employment brand. And that might be 15 really strong ideas stated in a way that's supportive and reflective of your culture. And then a couple of other types of statements that give you almost an endless bucket of ideas to tap back into and to draw out in your creative expressions. So those are some ideas. We'll drop maybe some links to a culture code in the chat below, and then maybe that would sort of get the juices flowing a little bit.
I want to add to that when Theresa described that baseline culture audit that happens at the beginning of an employment brand effort, one of the gifts of archetype and of story and of a culture assessment is that there's a deep storyline and you can keep digging deeper. It's not like a climate survey where we're just going, what do we like today about the culture that's going to shift and change? It's really going from the very beginning at the deeper content that drives, the motivations, the beliefs, the behaviors that we are looking to cultivate in our organization. So,
yeah.
Okay, so we move to the next one. We do have Okay, that's the same one. Same question. So now let's say that we've been successful. We've identified a candidate, we've offered them a job, we're bringing them into the organization. So we separated out onboarding as its own piece of the employee experience because, oh, this is day one. This is the opportunity to really make the experience of becoming part of your organization something that will never be forgotten, and something where, say it was me that was coming in, I, as a new employee, really get to begin to understand how I can make a mark here, how I can contribute here. So couple of ideas about how you might integrate culture talk and storytelling here. Theresa, you talked about a culture code, right? When I come in, I want to know what the culture code is. I want to know what are the behaviors that are, consistent with how we treat each other here, and the things that we're going to be noticing and rewarding. And I also want to know on the flip side, so the culture code might be the organization. On the flip side, I also want to know, hey, how does my story fit? How can I use my story to kind of align my own personal sense of purpose with the organization and their story and the larger purpose that we're all becoming a part of?
Right. I always make an analogy I think is really helpful. If you can think back to your first day at school, right? Whether it was high school, college, whatever it was, you show up, right? And you're shiny and new. You're the freshman.
Got some good clothes on.
Yeah, you got new clothes. You're excited. You're nervous. You don't know quite how you fit in, and oftentimes you don't. Right? You stick out like a sore thumb. And even though you feel like you've done your best to fit in and to become part, everybody can look at you and say, "That's the freshman. That's the new person." So if we can sort of shorten the cycle for the new guy or the new girl coming into an organization, then we can get them into full productivity faster. We can get them integrated on teams and working, aligned and collaborative faster. There's so many benefits, and we can retain them. We can do a much better job of making them feel comfortable, welcome, and retained. So understanding, as you mentioned, the culture code, but also doing the individual work, and somebody asking you, well, who are you and what's your story? And being able to use the individual archetype profile through Culture Talk's individual survey to express, this is who I am. This is the story of me. And this is the full human that's showing up on day one, and is excited and anxious. And, these are the things that I'm looking forward to and I'm really good at. And these are the areas where, boy, I could really use your support. This is what makes me nervous. This is what I feel challenged. This is a growth area for me. Mm-hmm. And understanding where are the people on the team that can support you.
Right.
Understanding, because they've already maybe had a profile, and that's what we recommend, that the team has their own individual profiles. And who is this leader I'm reporting up to? Who's the boss? What do they care about? How do they show up? How can I support what they're looking for personally? Mm-hmm. So there's layers and levels to this kind of thinking.
Yeah.
But the beautiful part is there's only one framework and there's only 12 patterns. And so it's easy to remember, and right from day one, and if you're bringing that to the fore, it's sticky.
And when we do have our September 28th call, we'll hear a little bit from, again, this organization that's doing this piece really well in terms of bringing new employees right into the understanding of what is the organization's cultural profile and storyline, and who are you on the team with, and what are other people's profiles. So it'll be a really fun conversation, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So let's keep going then, Theresa. So we now have onboarded people successfully, and we know that we're able to scale kind of these storylines, right, in a number of different ways. But I think one thing that people really want is a program that has some sustainability. A program that, back to the brand question, is not one and done, but that how do you take this storyline and this framework and draw it out like a red thread across the entire experience?
Right.
And so now we're in a quadrant we're calling include. What does it look like, right? What are we doing under include that really stands out?
Yeah. And again, like everything with this system and this approach, it goes back to the story. So when we consider the push to diversity, equity, inclusion, the one thing that Archetype does really well is help me to see you as a full human being, and I can't help but to stop and listen to your story. Mm-hmm. Listening is one of the critical elements of feeling heard. When I believe that someone actually listened and brought understanding to their listening, and so I'm able to I feel welcome to tell my story, and I feel like I'm going to be included and accepted for who I really am. And I think that core component is something that Archetypes can deliver in spades to help understand, who am I as a human being? What has my journey been? Let's drop the assumptions and let's drop the box checking that we often see in these conversations, and the sort of surface level trainings that can make us feel like, oh, we have to go to another mandatory training. And let's really listen to understand one another, and to see below the categories of human beings. And I think that opportunity to tell and share your own story and experience opens all kinds of doors, not just for the person who's telling it, but for the people who are listening too.
I'll note that again and again, what we see when a team really takes the time to share the story, their personal stories, and when they do it through Archetype, there's sort of this inherent safety that gets created, right? Because these are story patterns and they give me a space within which to talk about, my strengths and where maybe I am challenged. But there's this safety that opens people to being a little bit more vulnerable. And when a leader of a team in particular steps up and sort of sets the bar in terms of what they are willing to share about their own personal lives and experiences, the highs and the lows, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and they're willing to we know vulnerability builds trust. When I let you in to some aspect of me that was hard, of my life that was hard or difficult for me, I have to do that in a way that, I do it because I feel safe sharing that aspect of my life. And in sharing, it's just incredible what happens in terms of team formation. Right?
Yeah. And one of my favorite phrases that we hear in bringing this work into the inclusion conversation is, I had no idea. Mm. We don't even realize how many assumptions we bring. And I won't even use the word bias, right? Because that can get really confusing. We bring assumptions. We come to conclusions quickly because we have to. We're called upon to move so fast in our environments. So we land, right? We land in assumptions. And what we find this work doing is just seamlessly peeling away those assumptions. And again, people come to this perspective of understanding about the human beings on their team, that they never would have had if they hadn't taken that time to share stories and listen.
And I'll tie that as well back to, engaging a team, because it's in these moments of sharing story, it connects us on our brains are actually wired when we listen to story. We like, ooh, our brain waves start getting lined up. We start imagining ourselves in different storylines. But the other thing the new research is showing is that our hearts start to beat in unison when we are, I mean, that's crazy, right? But when we're hearing a story, we really like, we connect on a heart level. And if you want to engage people, how do you get their hearts into being part of this team?
Yeah.
And really, I think at that moment, the other thing is that, like, I go, oh, I've got something that I can contribute here.
Right.
I've got a way, I've got something that no one else got on the team, right? I've got a special way of seeing whatever challenges, whatever opportunities are here, and I can contribute on this level. And I think that's really when we start getting into the purpose work and we start getting into how do I engage the team and really make them feel like they're going to contribute in a special.
Right. We've used this phrase in the past, and I think it's really apropos in this case. You talked about the heart, but it's like this work takes things from the head of the leader to the hearts of the team, and it's fast. So the ability to tap into the hearts of your team and get to discretionary efforts is really an amazing opportunity. And it goes both ways, right? It's something that's a gift that keeps on giving when you have people who show up because they're connected through their own sense of purpose and through discretionary effort. And so that engage and include aspect of the life cycle, we hear a lot of, how do we get the employees engaged? The employees, X percentage of the employees are not engaged. And yet this is a really simple tool.
Simple.
That drives a deep sense of connection and engagement.
Yeah, it is. It is simple and it is human. And it's, just to think about, like, again, we're trying to tie this thread. So maybe they came in through a recruiting process, took an assessment, were onboarded, and now we're using, again, that same storyline to really include and engage. Theresa, take us to the fourth quadrant, develop, right? Now, how are we going to use archetypes to develop people, leaders?
Right. We have spent a lot of time thinking about this one and developed a lot of material to support the growth of individuals, of leaders, and of teams. And that's that whole piece. Maybe it starts with the self-awareness of understanding your own story, but then it goes to, so now here's my starting point. That's just where I am now. And if I can map out where I am now and what I'm really good at and what I want to apply myself to, I can take that and bring it into my employee development plan. Right. So my performance management plan, I can say, these are the things I'm excited about, good at, and I want to take on as my next challenge. These are the areas that I've struggled. I could use some training, some support. So right in that employee development aspect, the pattern and the ability to have an honest conversation about it can be an important starting point. The other opportunity is coaching, right? We hear a lot of people that, especially at the executive level, are tapping into opportunities to improve, to see the impact of their work style, relationships, those soft skills we're hearing about, and to understand what's underneath that. What's driving me? I keep bumping into the same wall over and over again, or I'm getting this feedback. I don't like this feedback. I don't even see it, right? So how do I use that understanding of what is my pattern, right? So, hey, I'm a magician. One of the, downsides or the shadows, we would call them, of being a magician is painting in broad strokes, putting really big ideas out there, but getting a little bit light on the details of how we're going to accomplish that. So even the pattern recognition that shows me, I tend to do this. I get excited about big ideas. I tend to struggle to articulate the details. Bringing that to my attention slowing myself down, having a coach or a colleague who can help me to frame the details because I'm not good at it. And, even identifying someone who loves the details and making sure they're backing me up, and that I've got a partner or a accountability coach who's going to support me in remembering to do that. And those are just a handful of very simple ways. I think it's really exciting that each of the patterns have levels of development, and that within the system, we're not saying once a magician, always a magician.
Right.
That you couldn't take a pattern that would really support your growth, something that might be low for you, and understand how to cultivate it, to develop it, to work on it. And that's another opportunity with all kinds of supporting tools. So within the CultureTalk system, we have just, a whole library of resources that can be used by the individual or by somebody who's coaching them, or at the team level, to help take a team.
I also want to just comment, like, leaders, right? How to develop leaders using this kind of framework as they get to know people on their team. Ooh, I have a magician. Ooh, I have a ruler. Ooh, I have a creator. For them to start to understand those patterns in terms of what can I count on these people for, and where can I coach them, right? Like, who's on the team.
They're stuck again. They're stuck again.
Also using the system to think about, when I'm leading people of different patterns than I am, like, where do we connect, and where do we have some conflict, right? Sort of naturally wired in our experience, so that you can become a more effective leader by catering to individuals on your team. What do they need for their growth and development? How do I work successfully with this individual and really bring out the best in them in terms of what they have to contribute?
Right. And one of the ways we've seen that be particularly successful is when a team adopts the language. So it's 12 patterns. And when a team knows them, instead of calling out somebody and, sort of finger pointing a particular behavior, we can point to the pattern and say, oh, that pattern here it is again. It's showing up again. Ooh, we really want to avoid the, outcomes of that pattern. We want to keep it on the positive side, focus on the strengths of it, but we can point to experiences and stories and things that have happened where we are trying to shift the outcomes and change things. So when something does go downhill, which inevitably will, we can use it to address conflict. We can also steer around conflict and identify
too, like, quick. This is a simple, quick recognition of pattern that teams develop a muscle for, right? As you say, to either steer around it or to see it and nip it in the bud, and move on and get back to being successful with each other.
Yes.
We have a question that came in, Theresa.
Okay. So I'm missing the question. Go ahead.
Hello, Christopher. Many training sessions result in enthusiasm up front, then new ideas tend to gather dust. How do you follow up with your methodologies to sustain your ideas?
Okay, so, dust. We don't want dust. Right. So one of the ways that we follow up with the methodologies is by providing tools. So we've developed a number of different tools. I've mentioned them, but we have a library, a resource. And if you're interested in seeing behind the scenes and taking a peek at some of those things, we're happy to connect with you and to share some of them. But making those resources available to the team as a reminder to keep it alive. So that might look like a workshop that gets done quarterly. It's modular, if you will, so that you can build on what we learned, a couple months ago. Now we're going to revisit that. We also have companies and organizations that are using the system that embed the icons into their employee handbook or their contact guides. People who are using them to identify themselves on Zoom calls. Oftentimes you'll see us doing that. We didn't today, but identifying themselves with their patterns. And everything from screensavers and electronic ways of identifying and keeping that alive to tools. Like here's one I have on my desk, for instance. This is a fantastic tool. Teams love this. It's a cheat sheet. We call it a cheat sheet. So it's a reminder of, hey, if this pattern shows up on our team, well, let me just quickly tap into what do I know about that? Trigger some of what I've learned over time. And then we've got tip sheets and guides to pair things
How to
up.
be creative, how to evolve through change, how to look at what your latent patterns are. There's so many different levels to thinking about archetype as a story as a development tool. And one of the things I want to mention too is that because they're human stories, like we understand them already. So unlike a system where you have to memorize a set of letters or numbers or colors and kind of remember what was that about, like I'm an X, what is an X? You know, when I say I have a high creator pattern, people already know what creator is, right? And they already have that very quick understanding. And so that also helps to keep it alive.
Right.
Theresa mentioned teams adopt the language, and it's fascinating to watch that, right? We had a member of our team who had high creator, high innocent pattern, and sometimes she would talk about like an idea, and then she'd go, "Oh, butterfly," and it would like fly away, right? But we knew she was referring to her tendency to get a little bit distracted by a nice new idea. And so you know, even like we call ourselves out when we start to know, like sometimes if I'm in a meeting, high creator, I'll say, I know I'm doing that thing that slows us down, right? Because we have this language to acknowledge where we are in our head and our thinking, where we are in our, you know, maybe in the moment, you know, we can call out, hey, I think my such and such pattern is hitting up against yours, right? Because we have this very user-friendly language for referring to those things.
Yeah.
It keeps it alive.
Right. And I think that, you know, another component of it is, hey, the iconography, the names, it's fun. There's a stickiness to it. It's the ability to share it on social, the ability to pull it into your, you know, different systems within the organization and to embed it that makes it sticky, memorable, fun. And so it's more fun to play with this system and to bring it to life than something that's dry. And so therefore we find people do. And so months later, instead of having died and been on this nice exercise we did, what we see is that people are thinking about it in a deeper way, applying it in a deeper way, and calling back CultureTalk consultants and people who help them, you know, to bring the work in to say, hey, we have another idea. What else can you offer me? Our employees are asking for more, and we hear that a lot as well.
And even years later, right? So you said months later, it's getting deeper, but I'm thinking about even the organizational archetypes years later. A team that was part of really validating an organizational profile through archetypes is still talking archetype. And they're saying, there goes our every person again. Or here comes our, you know, ruler. We need more of that in this situation. Or we are, you know, the question at the beginning about the brand and keeping it fresh. Maybe some things are evolving here. Maybe we have acquired a firm or been acquired or gotten into a new market space, and we need to shift or deepen that story. All of that is available through this kind of pattern recognition. So. Yay! We got ourselves around the wheel, Theresa. So those are some ideas about employee experience, and we're going to have a couple more conversations in the coming weeks. And we are headed into our last certification program of 2023, coming on October 31st. Our certification program is an 8-week online Zoom-based live training with kind of small cohorts, but we have a program that will happen at 10 a.m. Eastern and a program that will happen at 5 p.m. Eastern. If you are curious about, integrating this system and thinking into your employee experience, if you're in a company or you are consulting with a company that has some needs in this area, reach out to Theresa or I. We are super happy to jump on a call to give you a survey to experience, to, as you said, give a behind the scenes peek at the work, to introduce you to some other folks that have come through the training. We welcome you to consider joining us as a CultureTalk certified partner, and we'll drop a link in the comments here to that upcoming class.
Very cool. Nice to see you. And we'll see you again in a couple of weeks.
All right. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.